everyone. My name is Kerry Slade. I am the Assistant Academic Director of Temple's Innovation and Entrepreneurship Institute. I'm also an Assistant Professor at Temple, and I'm really excited for you to join us for the next hour as we talk about innovation intelligence. Really a cool topic, and one reason I love it so much is because it requires creativity. It's really nice when you can combine business and innovation and being creative. So I'm really excited for you to join us. Let me just check the chats here, make sure. Okay, we can see the participants list, Nick says. Let's see. Can you still see it? I can't see it. Let's see, let me close it. We good now, Nick? Okay. All right, great. We're all good now. Okay, thank you very much. I relied on you for letting me know if there's a technical problem. So how did this course come about? This kind of topic area. And I wanted to highlight, this is part of a course that I teach in Temple's Innovation Management and Entrepreneurship graduate program. We have a master's program, and you can also get a certificate just by taking 3 classes. So this innovation intelligence is one of the topics we teach in the course. The course is running right now. So for any of you who may be in my class, I've got about 40 students. Some of them may be on today. This will be kind of like a summary and an overview of this topic. Hopefully not too repetitive for you, but for the rest of you, this hopefully will be all new information. So if anyone's interested in learning more about the program, my email is down at the bottom here. There's also a QR code you can scan. I really think the program helps you differentiate from others, helps you get into innovation roles. If you're a scientist or a technologist and you want to move more into management, this is a great master's for you. And of course, if you're interested in entrepreneurship as well. So any questions, let me know. We will send out the slide deck at the end of the presentation, so you can have all this information there. Okay, so what is intelligence? We are talking about innovation intelligence today, and what is that? One of my favorite innovation intelligence professionals is Sina Sharp, and she says intelligence is knowledge and foreknowledge about the entire business environment that results in action. So she emphasizes that knowledge is information about the past, right? So we can gather knowledge, we can do our best to predict what might happen, but knowledge is about the past. Foreknowledge is information that might tell you what's going to go on in the future. And I want to just pause for a second to apologize. They're doing construction in the house next door. I'm in my basement. I'm in the quietest place in the house. There's really nowhere else for me to go. So if you hear a little bit of banging, that is why. I apologize for that. That's just something we're going to have to deal with. So foreknowledge, how can you kind of collect information about the current state and about the past that will then allow you to look into the future and make some predictions or some educated guesses that would allow you to be prepared? So that's really what intelligence is. And you have to pay attention to surprising, unusual, or uncomfortable changes. A lot of times in a company, if a new competitor pops up or there's a substitute, you may hear people say, oh, we don't have to worry about that. No, that's never going to be anything. And that is exactly what you want to pay attention to. Those things that you want to ignore, but you know deep down that you should not. So the bottom line is uncertainty equals opportunity. And this is quite a timely presentation because we didn't know that the COVID-19 situation would happen when we scheduled this presentation. But this, as you can see all around us, innovation is just being driven by this situation. So I say, welcome to the future. The future is here. A lot of the trends that we've seen have just been accelerated. Going online, delivery, remote work, remote telemedicine, things like that. So welcome to the future, it's here. And what kind of innovations am I talking about? Well, we have, contactless, this box here that was built that allows doctors to test people without making contact with them. And I put these YouTube links, so if you want to watch any of these videos later, you can. We have engineers in East Africa. They're developing ventilators for very, frugally, for very cheap, that can be manufactured on a large scale without a lot of money. We've got another African entrepreneur who's doing touchless hand washing. How can we make sure that everyone can be clean where there may not be, electronic faucets and things like that? We've got devices for splitting ventilators. You may have heard about this, where ordinarily one ventilator goes to one person, but when you have a shortage of ventilators, how can we use that machine to serve more than one person? So they have devices now that can allow ventilators to be used by more than one person. And then this great invention, which is a device that sanitizes 80,000 masks a day. So we've been just throwing out masks and not reusing them for probably decades now, and it's sort of caught up to us. We ran out and there have been some shortages. So how can we perhaps be a little more conservative, a little more frugal, and not have to throw everything out, but just rather reuse and sanitize them? So really interesting stuff coming out. And not just in the health sector, but even small businesses have had to adapt. This is from a store in Philadelphia, a little bodega that many of you may know around the neighborhood, where they moved to Windows service, but then nobody could see what was in the store, even though you might know what you want, but some people like to browse. So they moved the store menu kind of outside to allow people to look at it. So it may seem small, but maybe this is sort of where the future is going, where you browse more of an electronic or picture version of a store rather than actually going into the store. Innovation in language. Coronavirus has led to a lot of new words. Some of you might have heard of some of these. Blur's Day, when you don't know what day it is because you've been doing the same thing in your house for the past 2 months, right? Quarantines, the idea of working together where we're actually sort of apart. COVIDiot, someone who doesn't wear a mask and is reckless and isn't following the guidelines. So how do social media apps, how do dictionaries, how do talk to text programs, how are they going to adapt to this explosion in new language? This is from a hackathon in Germany, where 26,000 people participated remotely to come up with solutions for the coronavirus. So that's why I say the future is here, where people literally all over the world, thousands and thousands of them, are working on projects where they didn't even know each other last week. One of the most interesting things to me is the changes in communication. There's a lot of emphasis on wearing masks, and they are important, but nobody really likes wearing a mask, right? You can't see what the person is. Is the person smiling? Are they frowning? You're like trying to look at their eyes really hard to discern how they're feeling. You may not realize how much you rely on reading lips in conjunction with someone speaking to understand what they're saying. So having a professor at the front of the classroom wearing a mask, some students are going to struggle with that, for example. There's some really interesting examples. One I really like is the PPE Portrait Project, which came about actually when Ebola was more of a global epidemic a few years ago, because everyone was suited up in this PPE and patients can't see their doctor's faces, and it's really impersonal. And now today they're in the hospital alone without friends and family. And it's not just to make people feel good, because you may know that if someone has a connection and warmth and feels more emotionally supported, they're going to do better physically. So to have patients feel isolated and alone is not good for their health status either. There's this clear mask over here, which is trying to solve some of the problems I was talking about not being able to lip read or see emotion. And then the one down the bottom is a company that will print your face on a mask for you. This is interesting for 2 reasons. One, because it helps humanize you and people can actually see your face. But 2, they're advertising it as a way to still unlock your iPhone even if you have a mask on. So it's pretty funny that Apple, one of the most innovative companies we know, came out with a Face ID, which many of us, not all of us, but some of us have been using. And now the problem is we can't unlock your phone when you're outside, right? If you're wearing a mask. So it's a little bit, it just shows you how things can change so quickly. Even if you're a major innovator and you're really ahead in technology, Apple was not able to predict the face mask would become a thing. And now people are having problems using their phone in different settings. So really interesting developments there. So these are the slides I usually show, and it's a little bit funny because we've had so many radical changes in the past couple of months that these trends seem a little bit more slow moving and less radical, if you will. Medical marijuana is becoming legal not only in the United States but all around the world. And you can see by this graph here, in states where medical marijuana is legal, there's fewer prescriptions for pharmaceutical pills. Pain being the greatest number, but also anxiety, nausea, psychosis, seizures, sleep disorder, depression. So how are pharmaceutical companies, they should see this coming, and hopefully they do. But how are they going to react to this if more and more of their prescriptions start getting replaced by medical marijuana? What are the decisions that they have to make? Do they try to fight this trend? Do they try to acquire a medical marijuana company? There's lots of different decisions these companies can make. Online education, a huge one now. A lot of you are associated with Temple University, and we moved online about 2 months ago, right after spring break. So we've all been forced to engage on this new platform, whether we want to or not. And I think one of the biggest challenges here, which many of you with small kids may be seeing, is how do you get young people to learn remotely? It's one thing if you've kind of learned the basics and you go to college, we're a little more acclimated to that, but young people, elementary school, has been a major challenge. So there should be hopefully a lot of innovation in that area. We can actually successfully teach young kids how to learn when they're not in a physical classroom, which is a major challenge. And then some other trends here: artificial intelligence versus lawyers. My background is in law. I was a lawyer for 10 years. And there are programs that will review contracts faster and more accurately than lawyers. So you give a lawyer a contract and say, okay, make sure you read this over to spot anything that might be inappropriate, or we don't like the terminology, or there's any errors. And the lawyer might take 2 hours to read it and spot 10 errors, and the program reads it in 5 minutes and spots 20 errors. So how is that industry going to deal with that? And then, of course, clean energy, renewable energy. Oil and gas has been threatened for some time now, and this situation has only gotten more dire. So not only are oil companies under pressure for environmental concerns, but now economically, nobody's driving anywhere, nobody wants oil at all anymore. Yeah, I see a couple raised hands, so let me go ahead and call on you. Bob, did you have a question? I saw your hand was raised earlier. You good, Bob?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, good. All right, just want to make sure. And Rabab, go ahead. You have a question? No, that was just a phantom hand? Okay, all right, no problem. Didn't want to be ignoring people here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take you through, so I talked about a lot of trends, a lot of crazy stuff going on. How do you process this as a company? How do you take this information, analyze it, synthesize it, and then do something with it, right? Instead of getting overwhelmed. And I'm going to use the example of the airline industry, just because most of us are fairly familiar with what's going on, and the changes have been so radical. Again, I apologize for the construction noise in the back. I just can't do anything about that. Let's check the chat here. Robab, can you still not hear me?
You're fine.
Okay, all right, cool. So keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to be talking about the airline industry. And as a company, you have to decide what your strategy is going to be. So these are some innovation strategies ranging from proactive to passive. And I'll put up some explanatory text, but I'm not going to go through it in detail. So you can look at that in the slides later when you get them sent out. So proactive, these are your first movers. They're the ones doing the research. They're the ones inventing new processes, new technology. They take big bets, high risks, and it pays off. So examples would be, DuPont, Apple, and Singapore Airlines, for example, real first movers in their industry. There's active companies, the ones that they're fairly innovative, but they're mostly defending their existing technology and market. But once something new comes out, if someone else tries it, then this company is willing to try it again. Just checking the chat here. Okay. Reactive companies. These are your followers. Not quite a fast follower that's probably up here in active, more like a slow follower, but they still follow. They see what happens. They're just trying to make sure they're as productive as possible with what they're already doing. They're not really looking for a lot of new opportunities, but if the industry starts to change, they'll react and change with it. And then passive, last. Basically, these are your laggards, the companies that wait for the whole industry to change or wait for customers to say, hey, you have to change or I'm not going to buy from you anymore. I put law firms in there because it seems like sometimes law firms, we love the billable hour, we want to keep the billable hour, and not until clients say, hey, I think I want a flat fee, are we willing to change. I think there was a hand raised. Alan, did you have a question or anything? Are you okay? All right, I think we're okay. I'm going to move on. So as a company, you need to decide what your innovation strategy is, and then that will help you take all this information and do something with it, right? So one of the tools I'm really going to focus on is corporate foresight. And this is a process through which you develop alternative views of the future that are kind of exciting and wild, but also not that far off. So we're not talking about something that could never physically happen, for example, like we don't have gravity anymore, but we're talking about something that might be pretty radical, that we can't have children in schools anymore. That's pretty radical, but also could be plausible. So the purpose of this is to allow you to become better prepared. If you prepared for a whole range of crazy options, then chances are if something crazy does happen, you'll have some solutions and alternatives to turn to. So this is loosely the process laid out. Discovery first, so gather information on the trends and issues. Anticipation, use the tools to look at the trends and project them into the future. If this trend continued, what would that future look like? And then planning. Once you have these ideas of what the future might look like, create new strategies, business models, and take action in order to act on that information and foresight. So we're going to talk about discovery first. I'm going to kind of go through an example with the airline industry so you can see how this process works. So discovery. This is really about gathering as much information from as many sources as you can about anything that might affect your industry. And if that sounds like a big job, it is. Because usually companies are focused on their competitors, maybe regulators, and customers primarily, maybe a couple other stakeholders. But this actually encourages you to look to substitutes, to look more deeper at competitors, like who are they hiring? Do they have job openings? What might that indicate about the company? So you're studying these indicators in a systematic way so you can help predict what might happen in the future. So just a couple touches on this graphic here. Patent filings. People file provisional patents and patents before they actually release the invention. So if you have someone monitoring patent filings or even trademark filings, you may get an indication that one of your competitors or a substitute or some technology related to your industry is coming out. Did someone just build a new plant, and what might that indicate about what direction that company is going? Local news articles. Sometimes executives are a little bit looser lipped in local news articles rather than big national papers. So look for local stories about the company. Are there any new substitutes? So a substitute is different from a competitor because it's slightly different. So instead of taking an Uber, you would ride the bus. They're not really competitors. It's not a car. It's a much different mode of transportation, but it still does get you from point A to point B. So look at substitutes. And hiring announcements, as I mentioned. Are they looking for a new director of innovation? Are they looking for a new director of something else that you can glean something from? One of the most basic ways to do a trend analysis and discovery is to use the pestle analysis. And you can use any acronym you want. If this acronym doesn't fit for your purposes, you can add things onto it. So it's just a tool to help you be as complete as possible. And I'll use this tool, so I'll go over that again later. This again is from Sina Sharp, and she recommends looking for trends in all of these other areas, right? So not just competitors and customers, but also the economy, other industries, prospects, cultural trends. How are these going to affect your business? And where are you going to look for these trends? I want to give a shout out to Nick because he helped prepare these slides. He's working with me in my class. Where do you source that information? You can get it from the news and regular websites, but there are some more specific sources that are really focused on trends and monitoring, potential disruptive information. So here's some newsletters on here: The Hustle, MIT Technology Review. If you get really deep into an industry, you're going to get a lot of information from other people in the industry who want to chat about what you're interested in. Podcasts, they can be speculative and futurist. Great to really get into a new domain or to kind of stretch your mind in new ways. RSS feeds. This is pretty interesting, where you basically sign up for an organization's RSS feed, and as soon as anything gets posted on the website, it comes into your app and you have all the news there at once. So you don't have to go to the website to look and then go to this other website to look at that website and go to a third one. You can collect them all together in one app. So that's pretty interesting. And then other tools and apps like this. So some of you may have heard of tools like Google Trends or Alexa.com, Social Searcher, Exploding Topics. These are ways to use the data from the internet to figure out what's trending. So Alexa will be, what are people searching for in their homes with Alexa? I mean, that's amazing that we have access to that data. And Google Trends as well. What are people searching for when they look at Google? So really interesting ways to get insight into customers, into industries. If we have some time at the end, we can go back and look at some of these, but I want to make sure I save some time for questions and for example and stuff. Okay, so back to the airline industry analysis. I'm in the discovery phase, and I'm going to start with this pestle analysis. I put a plus there because I added some other trends. So let's see if I can get some participation here, either in chat or you can raise your hand. Let me get the panes up here. What are some trends affecting the airline industry, either now or that started, last year or a couple years ago? Who's got some trends for me? Emily, go ahead. Let's see, do I have to unmute you or are you okay? Okay, I think you should be okay now, Emily.
I was gonna say overbooking. That's like a huge trend right now. Not right now, but before this happened, where people were not guaranteed seats on the plane that they bought the ticket for.
Mm-hmm. So maybe airlines, and usually they overbook because some people don't show up for the flight, but maybe they were doing it more. And if they were particularly strapped for cash, they may rather overbook than make sure they don't have any empty seats. Okay, good. Jaron, go ahead. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Go ahead. Let's see.
Sorry, energy prices.
The energy prices, right. So airlines run on jet fuel, which is made from oil. And it's, I guess that it's good now, but historically the prices have been going up, right? So that definitely is a trend they've had to contend with. Thank you. Go ahead, Fran. I'm going to unmute you, Fran. I think you should be good now. Oh, still not hearing you, Fran. So let's see here. Try again. Okay, let's, how about Gail? Go ahead. Gail, can you hear me? Can you go?
Am I unmuted yet?
Yes, all right, there we go.
I was asking you about the trends that are going on with retail. Seems like there's a lot of bankruptcy announcements, and wondering if really we're going to see a lot of consolidation or overall changeover as to how people will shop in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And actually, sort of bringing it back to the airlines, one trend has been internet connectivity in planes now. You know, a few years ago, you were lucky if you had it. Now you may have it, probably, but you have to pay for it. So one thing people have been, you know, speculating is going to happen is that the flight is going to become like a shopping experience. If everyone has internet and you can provide it for free, then they can do their shopping, they can book, you know, excursions for wherever they're going. So combining retail and airline industry definitely could happen. But you're right about retail. That's been suffering for a while there. Blendine, go for it. Hey, Blendine.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I would say two trends. Now, luggages are more and more expensive, even for international flights. You have a lot of premiums, and also premiums if you don't register online before they try to reduce people in interactions at the airport.
Yeah, absolutely. So that can be kind of wrapped up into a trend toward ancillary revenue. So you have the ticket price, that's one thing you pay for, and now you're paying for bag fees, you're paying for snacks, you're paying for drinks, you're paying for the seat upgrade, you know, you're paying for 2 extra inches of leg room. So you're right, all those extra ancillary fees that airlines are actually, you know, supplementing their revenue with for the prices. Okay, good. Let's see what I got in the chat here. We got carbon reduction. That's true. A lot of airlines are trying to you know, buy carbon offsets, so their flights are carbon neutral. Economy seating, low cost flights. Yeah, so there's more and more low cost providers. I flew Frontier a couple months ago, and I packed everything for my weekend trip into a backpack because I didn't want to check, because you have to pay for everything, right? You had to pay to check a bag there. Or you had to pay rather for a carry-on, even the small carry-on size. Sitting 6 feet apart, yep, reducing number of passengers. A lot of airlines are leaving the middle seat open. Helen says discount travel, similar to EU, where you pay for each amenity, yep. Smaller seats, biofuels, yep. Kate says airlines need to take extra time to disinfect planes, yes. So it's not just, you know, these health precautions are operationally causing a lot of new procedures and processes and delays for the airlines. Helen says airlines are planning to go back to, planing people from the back to the front. So instead of doing these groups where you could be all over the plane, they're gonna have a better order there. And Carol's saying, yeah, 6 feet, charging for the 6 feet apart seat. So I read something where tickets are supposed to go up by 50% because if they can't sell the middle seat, well, then that cost has to be, you know, put onto the aisle and the window, right? Okay, great. Good trend. Okay, cool. So we could spend a lot of time doing this, and if you were getting paid to do it in a company, you certainly would. These are some of the trends I came up with. So I did the pestle analysis. I added this health category at the end. Again, you're using the framework to help you, not to confine you. So use it how it works for you. So we're going to come back to these trends. This is what I did on my own here. Okay, so back to the process. We've done some discovery. We've gotten trends from various sources, and now we're here in the anticipation phase. What are we going to do with this information about the trends to help us predict what might happen in the future? So, and there's a variety of tools for doing that, some of which are really cool and fun. This one, world building or sci-fi prototyping. So you create fictional worlds to generate ideas and intellectual property. I like this quote. It took Intel 10 years to design and build a chip, so they needed to know 10 years out what people would do with computers. So very interesting to think about, how are we going to be using computers 10 years from now? You'd have to think a lot about that and really plan it out, because there's a lot of different directions it can go. Basically, an idea generation tool, right, to help you think outside the box, and then maybe in 10 years that will be the box. One tool, threatcasting. So probably we all wish we had done a little bit more of this before now, but creating futures based on dystopian prompts. So global pandemic, what would happen? What would this company do, and how would this company react, and what would be the shortages, and how would the government interact? Nuclear war and hacking. So just making sure, if anything, if the worst comes to pass, that you at least have practiced, right? Practice is good. And then scenario planning, foresight, and wargaming. So this is the one I'm going to focus on the most. This is making assumptions about the future. Okay, we're going to assume the future looks like this. Then how would my company need to react, or how would I need to adapt? And this graphic is pretty helpful here. So this kind of describes the process we're using. Identifying driving forces, those are the trends. Identify uncertainties, which trends are likely to happen and which trends are not likely to happen. And if the trend did occur, would it be high impact and really important, or would it not really impact my industry that much? Then developing scenarios for the future, and then discussing where do we go from here? What actions can we take? So this is a good summary of a similar summary to that foresight graphic. So okay, here I am back in my trends. And what I want to do, I'm actually going to choose two to focus on, but before I actually get into that, I'm going to plot the trends on this matrix of, are they certain or uncertain, high impact or low impact? And this allows me to prioritize the trends. Because if I've got even just here, I've got maybe 10 or 20 trends here. How do I know how much attention to pay to each trend? Are they all equal? Well, no, they're not. So what you do is you take this matrix and you plot the trend, based on research, based on educated assumptions and guesses. You plot the trends on this graph to determine what are the most important trends I need to pay attention to. And even if a trend is uncertain, that doesn't mean you don't need to take it seriously. Because if a trend is certain and high impact, you can pretty much bet the company is going to prepare for it, right? We know it's going to happen. It's really important. We got this. It's really the uncertain trends where companies have the most, difficulty paying attention to, because we don't really know if it's going to happen or not. It could, but it could not. So am I really going to invest in that? But the point is, if you prepare for uncertainty, then you're much better positioned to take advantage of it once it occurs. Okay. So what we did, this is also from my class, because we had a lot more trends actually we were discussing. You can see how we took these trends and put them on the matrix, right? So for example, internet connectivity. We know it's going to happen, right? It's already happening in planes, and it's not low impact, but it's actually a great thing. It's not going to radically change the way we do business. Airlines may add on some services and some shopping experiences, but it's not going to change the industry, right? Well, as far as we know right now. So I think high impact, but on the lower end, kind of toward the middle of high impact, is great here. And then we have this ancillary revenue trend here. So this is the bag fees and things like that. Potentially low impact. You may disagree with some of these things. That's totally fine. But I would actually move this up to the certain category, because we know that's happening. So I would probably move that up. So this is just an example of some people's opinions about where the trends might go. So once you've got your trends over here, you want to focus on the high impact trends, right? So then you're going to this is where I'm taking my two trends. So let me go back here. I chose income inequality, increasing customer stratification, and new responsibility for health regulatory compliance. So basically the trends I chose are that airlines would be almost like they would have to do all of this health checking before passengers will be allowed on the plane, and the compliance responsibility. So the government would say, airlines, you have to do this, and then airlines would have to adopt all of those functions. So that's one trend I'm projecting into the future. And then the other one is income inequality, which unfortunately is increasing not only in America, but also in other places around the world. How is that going to impact the industry 10, 20 years from now? So those are the two trends I chose to focus on. Let me just mute a couple people here. Okay. So once I got my two trends that I want to focus on, I've decided these are high impact trends that are either uncertain or certain. I really need to pay attention to them. What I can do is actually use this scenario table to create 4 different potential worlds. So each quadrant represents a different world, a different potential future. So for example, this top left quadrant here, there's going to be high inequality, but airlines have no responsibility for health compliance. So we can think about, if there's a lot of inequality, how would that affect the customers? Well, potentially there would be a lot of customers who couldn't afford to even take a flight, or maybe they'd take a flight once a year, and then a bunch of really rich people who are flying everywhere all the time. So that's what that world might look like with the income inequality. And if airlines don't have any responsibility for health concerns, then maybe those poor people who are taking one flight a year, it ends up being kind of a very dangerous flight for them because the airlines aren't responsible for any health precautions. So that would be one potential world. I saw there was a hand up here. Let me just check the chat. Okay, yeah, so Vineet says, this airline health check thing, he said it's gonna also be happening when we get to the workplace. So it's funny because for decades, employers have been kind of encouraging you to come to work, even if you're sick, right? And we kind of have that ethos in America, like, go to work, even take some Advil, just go, take some Dayquil, go to work, you can't skip work. But now that might be reversing, where employers are saying, no, you are not even permitted to come to work if you're sick. Okay, so I'm seeing a couple of hands raised. Just want to address, Fran, I see that you're having trouble hearing. Like, hopefully other people aren't having that same problem. It will be recorded, so we'll send that out as well. So don't worry if you're having a little problem here. Okay. And Darren says a new trend is working from home permanently. Absolutely. So all right, so kind of going back to our scenarios here. Let's talk about one more, which is this top right quadrant. So this would be high inequality, and the airlines are almost like medical providers, or at least medical screeners, where they have to do a lot of work to make sure passengers are healthy and can, even get on the plane and they're not spreading disease. So what would that world look like if you, and I want you to think about this, if you got high inequality, so potentially very stratified customer base of a lot of rich people and a few rich people rather, and a lot of poor people, and then the airlines are functioning like health providers and health screeners before anyone can get on a flight. So what potentially would that world look like if those two trends continued into the future? So I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. And this is where you really need to be creative, because what this is basically, excuse me, what this quadrant situation, it's a random association exercise. You're taking two seemingly unrelated things, you're putting them together, and you're asking yourself, what could they possibly have in common that might play out into the future? So this is where you need to be a divergent thinker. And the most important thing about divergent thinking is there are potentially 4 roles for creativity in order to come up with ideas and then decide which are the best ideas and then advocate for the ideas. When you're in the divergent thinking stage, you only want to think in the explorer phase and the artist phase. So you're not judging any ideas, you're not advocating for any ideas, you're just coming up with as many ideas as you can, and you're putting them in the matrix. Okay, great. I'm just trying to keep up with the chat here. Yeah, so Kate, hold that thought when we talk about the scenario in a little more detail. So, okay, here we are. I'm gonna give people a minute to think, and then I wanna get some ideas. You have high inequality here. We're gonna just focus on this one scenario. High inequality and airlines operating as like medical providers or screeners. So I'll give you 30 seconds, and then I wanna hear some ideas about what you think that world would potentially look like. What would the industry do? How would it have changed or adapt? Okay, cool. So let's get some ideas here. I'm going to start with Kate. Kate says there may be private airlines where the rich people buy access to a flight that they consider safe for travel. Okay, cool. So instead of having, there's already kind of corporate travel and people have their own jets, but there may be actual like private airlines where the rest of us can't travel on them, but rich people can, right? And then potentially that would be a safer flight. Everyone would have their health documentation submitted, so there'd be a more streamlined process for health screening for some people, but then other people would just have to go through, you know, the mill of getting screened there. Jeffrey says supersonic offerings for the wealthy. Yes, so supersonic air travel is coming. We've had the I'm blanking on the name, that French airline, the Concorde, I think it was, you know, decades ago, but supersonic air travel is coming back. Kelly says upcharges for fast tracking to the front. Yep, so you would have, you know, upcharges and fees for health screening potentially, ways to kind of make that process more streamlined if you could afford it. Finn says increased polarization and social tension. Airlines would accommodate more premium services, cutting of airline staff and services. Okay, good. So you would definitely have increased polarization, and you know, how is that going to play out in the airline industry? Bob says healthcare professionals as part of the crew. Absolutely. I can see a future where every company that you know, is over 50 employees has to have a nurse or a healthcare professional on staff to screen people as they walk through the door. Very interesting future. John says increased charges with white glove service from the moment you leave the house to the moment you get on the plane. So the airlines may try to vertically integrate a little bit more. So instead of just taking care of the flight and the baggage, maybe they'll go as far as the delivery, or you know, some do offer travel services, but you know, the pickup is run by the airline all the way to the transportation to your hotel. So they may try to vertically integrate. Good. Let's see here. Time dedicated for seniors. Okay, that probably will happen, you know, as our population gets older. Helen says less people in lounges, direct transport to the airplane. So maybe we're not all going to congregate in the waiting area and then file down that small hallway to get to the airplane. Maybe there'll be direct transportation to the airplane. Good. Darren says Uber helicopter rides in select cities. Great. Lori says increased utilization of travel insurance and evolution of that industry. Great, good. Carl says move first class to the back of the plane so they aren't exposed to the coach passengers. Good, so even more separation between the classes. Great. Kyle says more flexible refund cancellation policies, allow for ticket cancellation due to illness to ensure the safety of other passengers. That's a good idea, because if you've booked a flight but you have a fever, if you don't get a refund for that flight, you're probably going to try to fly anyway. So a little bit more flexibility there. Brian says thermal imaging, everyone. Yep. Fran says accelerating eVTOL drone copters. Yep. So other forms of transportation that are cheaper and quicker that maybe the poor people can access, since you know most of us can't afford a flight anymore. This would probably drive other modes of transportation or flight besides airplanes. Good. Kate says if the airline industry shrinks, there may be more flights to hub cities only and less small hop flights available. Right, so fewer flights. You may only get flights to major cities, and then the transportation in between those smaller cities is covered by another industry. Okay, cool. So that was just a short exercise. We did about 5 or 10 minutes thinking about what that future world would be like, and we already have a lot of ideas for potential areas of innovation or change in the future. And the idea is once you have those areas of this is what the future might look like, then you can compare what you're doing now and what you may need to be doing in the future and figure out how you want to change. The real interesting thing, so if you did this for all 4 of these quadrants, the best possible case is if you see an innovation that appears in all 4 quadrants, because then you know no matter what happens in the future, that innovation or that strategy, that idea is a sure bet, right? So once you complete all 4 of the quadrants, then you look for similarities among them, and you can say, oh my gosh, like in 3 out of the 4 quadrants, drones are a great investment. So I should probably put some money into drones, right? Airline companies maybe want to acquire a drone company or invest in one or something like that. We had a couple more comments. Timmy says, hey, Timmy, shorter haul travel for international flights. Yep. And then accelerated Hyperloop building. So more Hyperloop trains and other faster modes of transportation like that. Excellent. Great. Cool. Just doing a time check here. All right. So we already discussed this, these wild yet plausible future worlds, right? And this is really where you're driving, you know, what might the future look like and how can I make sure my company is prepared? So let's go back to our innovation strategies, because you have all this information, you've done the anticipation of what the future is going to look like, and now you need that planning piece, right? That third piece of the corporate foresight process. So you need to decide, what's your strategy? Because that's going to affect your plan, right? Am I fine with just kind of hanging on to my legacy product and not doing anything too risky or too crazy? Am I more of a passive or reactive type? Then maybe I don't really want to invest in one of these crazy new ideas or drones or something like that. But so your strategy is going to affect the actions that you take. And here's where we get into the planning phase. So this is from an article, I think it's, it should be listed at the bottom there. If it's not, I'll add the site before I do the slides. Talking about different types of innovation. Some of you may have heard of the types of innovation, incremental and radical. So I put those terms on there as well because they sort of dovetail with the core and transformational on this slide. But basically, incremental or core is when you have an existing product and you just make it bigger, you make it better, you make it a different color, right? You make a different flavor, you change what you already have to kind of make it new and exciting and fresh and potentially better. Adjacent is when you expand into a new business, but you didn't invent the business. So a good example of this, so let's do an example for core, let's use Uber. An example for core would be Uber adding a tip option, or adding, now I think, at least on Lyft, they have the license plate pop up. So they're adding things to the program to make it better, but they're not really inventing anything new. They already have the program. Adjacent is new to the company business. So good in adjacent innovation with Uber is the credit card. Now Uber has a credit card. Uber didn't invent credit cards, but it's certainly new to Uber to have a credit card. So that's a good example of innovation, adjacent innovation. And then transformational or radical. So this is really inventing something that doesn't exist yet. So this would be if Uber, had a drone company that was going to do drone pickups and drop-offs for people. Really radical new thing that we don't have yet. So that would be transformational. And once you understand what the future might look like, then you have to ask yourself, if I've got $1 million for my innovation budget, or if I've got $10 million for my innovation budget, or maybe I have $10,000 for my innovation budget, how am I going to allocate my budget to different projects among core, adjacent, or transformational projects? So this is from an article about managing your innovation portfolio, and they've done research that shows that the allocation of your innovation portfolio actually can affect outcome. So this is on the spectrum of incremental here to radical. And then these are pulls from the article here. Consumer packaged good companies often are just stuck in incremental innovation. So this will be like Pringles having new flavors or new packaging, or the low-fat Pringles and things like that. Industrial manufacturers often have this allocation. So they're mostly focused on core, but they do put some investment into adjacent and transformational as well. And then technology companies and early stage companies are more toward the radical end of the spectrum, where they're putting up to 70% of their investment in transformational and less into core and adjacent innovations. So the research from this article showed that share price actually was the highest among companies with this type of allocation here, the 70% core and 20% adjacent, 10% transformational. So the share price performance was the best among those companies, but the companies actually saw the most returns in isolation, project by project from the transformational innovations. So it may be the most stable for long-term growth to invest a lot in your core innovations, but if you really want to have a big return and make a big splash and potentially get a big reward, transformational innovation is where it's at. So once you do this process and you understand the landscape, you understand what the future might look like, then you can actually look at your portfolio and make decisions about what you're going to invest in and how, what type of projects you're going to invest in as a company. Okay, so that's all I have for you. So let's get into some questions and discussions. We got a few minutes here for questions or any comments. A lot of you are come from very different industries, so it'd be great if you've seen a trend or see how this could apply in your industry. I'd love to hear from you. So let me know what questions you have. Gerard, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, Jaren, no worries. So I think it's really interesting how even as reopenings are taking place, there are serious behavioral aspects to industries, and I'm just curious, how do you think people are thinking about the trade-offs between their health and willingness to engage in the economy at large, and are we going to be able to should companies more broadly just focus on developing a vaccine, because I feel like we're not going to really be able to scale to the point where we were before until a vaccine is created. So there are a couple points there, but really I think that this whole thing is a supply shock, and I just would be curious what you think the implications of that are to some of the material you delivered. Thanks.
Yeah, so obviously I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I have a couple thoughts. The vaccine is interesting because we all know we should wait for a vaccine before we can really go back to normal. And it may be that we're successful in kind of having a middle ground of between how it used to be and how it is now, where we can't really go anywhere. So there may be a middle ground there. But I think what we're seeing is we're reaching kind of the limits of human, human needs here, because yeah, we can do Zoom happy hours and things like that, but people actually physically need to live and be healthy. They need to interact with other people. We are social creatures, and the people that live the longest, the people that live to 100 years and longer than that, what they've shown are they have very strong social networks. So it's not just a question of health, of keeping the virus out of our system. It's a question of mental health and physical health in terms of human beings needing to interact and go out and socialize. So I'm sure that doesn't answer your question, but I think, what you have to deal with here is we're up against the limits of human psychology in terms of what we can handle. And even if it might be better for us to do certain things, wait a year and a half until everyone get vaccinated, it's going to be almost impossible to do that. I'd love to hear anyone else's thoughts on that though as well. Fran, do you want to try again? Go ahead, Fran. Oh, still don't hear you. Kyle, go ahead.
Sure, yeah, so more of a cautionary perspective from what I've noticed so far, since my company does do a good amount of innovation work in a variety of different industries, is that, and to caveat, this is something I think more industry-wide, that a lot of the people thinking about and coming up with the early innovations to potentially address these issues and concerns, and how do you get customers back into the stores, are well-intentioned in thinking about how to do from a healthcare standpoint. So one example is screening people's temperatures or breathing rate before you're even allowed to enter a retail store. But that fails to consider, what if the person has a respiratory condition to begin with, or what if they have an elevated temperature because they just went for a run or exercise. So there's no one solution fits all for these sort of aspects, and it needs to be approached carefully. Is my point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that's one of the most concerning trends that we're seeing is potential for discrimination, or potential for, you know, some people can go back to work because they tested for the antibodies, and some people can't go back to work because they didn't. And you know, that's something that leaders are discussing, whether that's a valid way to reopen the economy. I think you're absolutely right. The potential for discrimination and you know, disadvantaging people who already are, you know, suffering from pre-existing conditions is really strong. So I agree with you. We need to watch out for that. Just a couple questions or comments from the chat here. Sarah says, the originators of the scenario approach are from Royal Dutch Shell, and that is true. So the oil company, I think it was in the 70s, everyone was building refineries, building more and more refineries because oil was in its boom time. And Shell kind of did scenarios and looked in the future and said, I'm not sure if demand is going to continue to grow the way that we're building refineries. So maybe we should stop. And then that did come to pass, where demand decreased, and Shell was in the position of not having extra refineries that represent capital investments that it couldn't use. So absolutely. But Sarah's saying a lot of companies don't actually invest in this, and that's completely true. Most companies, you know, this process, if you did it correctly, would take months really to actually analyze the environment, come up, do the scenarios, and it's ongoing, right? It's not like you just do it once and then you're good for 5 years. You have to continually do it. So it really is a lot of work. It takes money and human resources, and I think most companies do not do it, but the companies that do will be the ones that survive and that continue to innovate. Nathan says, how does this all affect small business? So that's a good question. And I think I wouldn't say that it doesn't or does affect small business in much different ways, perhaps just on a different scale. So a lot of small businesses, you know, they're having to adapt really quickly now. And it's really actually heartening to see how many small businesses have adopted delivery, or, you know, you order at the window instead of going into the store. So I think that small businesses, especially with so much competition, if they can just invest a little bit of time and energy in this process, it will give them new strategies to try, and will hopefully, you know, differentiate the small business from its competitors and allow the small business to compete. For example, there's a kind of a I guess it's like a gift store in one of my hometown. They've got lots of crystal items, and you know, that's the kind of thing where you might buy someone a wedding gift, but their business was really down. But they hired some young kid. He's got their online business up, and they're doing like 90% of sales online, right? So making sure that small businesses continue to adapt and just get those skills is really important to competition. Any other questions or comments? Kyle's saying a lot of larger companies are reevaluating what they consider CapEx versus OpEx, especially with the need for enhanced IT with the remote work from home. So that's interesting. I have to think a little bit more about that, but that's, so the idea is if people are working from home, what is an operating expense versus a capital expense? For example, my desk at home, maybe, you know, somehow the company would roll that into its budgets and allocate that a certain way. That's interesting. And Kelly says office layouts are going to change drastically. There's been a shift to open concept, and again, it's so funny. We thought open concept was the best. This is really innovative, and now it's like, oh, never mind. We're not going to do open concept anymore. We need division between people. So it's really reversing a trend that we've seen there so far. Really interesting. All right. Any other questions or comments before we sign off? Oh, we got one more chat down here. Oh, thanks, Gail. Bob Walk says some small businesses can use SCORE. Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us. This is a lot of information, but again, this is just an overview of some of the techniques we teach and of the course that I teach on this topic. So if anyone's interested in learning more about that, please feel free to email me, and we will hopefully see you on one of our future events. Yeah, so we'll send out the slides, and then I'll have the QR code available. Thanks for all the positive comments, everyone. I'm really glad you could join us.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, I'm going to sign off, but I hope you have a great day and hope to see you online and in person again soon. Bye-bye.